So recording is on.
All right.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the WAX OIG Roundtable number 2. Today is Tuesday, 1st of August, and I welcome you all. The agenda mainly is the same as last time. So we're talking about updates, the upcoming OIG timelines for the evaluations, 5.1 technical and 5.2, which is due soon. Then we are going to have a look at the network status and the API reports that we received. After that, we can hopefully talk about WAX history APIs. And then we are transitioning into our question and answer part where you can come up and ask any question you want or tell us what you think. So starting with the timelines, we just concluded the evaluation for version 5.1. This was a full evaluation, so we scored the tech ops part and the product also. I'm sure nobody missed it. We announced yesterday that we concluded the evaluation and the results were pushed to chain. Today, the payment is available on the guilds.org contract. In case you wonder how that works, you can scroll down and have a look at the push eval action, which we use to push the scores to chain. This month with a minimum requirement of 120 points to make it into standby and a scaling threshold of 95%. If you need and want to claim your funds, you can do it through this contract. I'm pretty sure you all know how it's working by now. And talking of that, we got the next evaluation coming up, the technical evaluation. We are taking the score snapshot on August 20th. I've added it to the most recent issue for you all, and we will probably post it today in the WAX governance channel. So make sure to, so for this one, you actually don't have to do anything because we are taking care of the tech ops snapshot. But right after that, we got the full evaluation for the 5.2 guidelines, which we will announce shortly. And this is your important submission cutoff date. It's Thursday, August 31st. So the last minute of this month. I don't want to get into too many details when with the current top 21 and standby records, but overall we are sitting at 36 guilds on WAX, 3 of which unfortunately didn't make the cut into standby because of some issues. So that leaves us with 21 with the top 21 guilds and another 12 standby guilds, ranging from 203 points to 123 points. It's actually important that I mention this this time around because it has been brought to our attention, and that's where I transition into the network state, that in some cases we've seen producers losing some rounds or blocks. Overall, the mainnet doesn't look too bad. The performance is wonderful. We got assured by the Taco Guild that they don't run any, how is it called, OC enabled on their node, and yet they managed to have a fantastic block producer performance. And in terms of reliability, we've seen a few rounds missed. I mean, partly because of the upgrade we did in the network with the hotfix being applied on producers. and a backup not kicking in when the producer went down, but that's okay, happens to the best. Overall, we're seeing a very vital network in the past 30 days. Everything is working as intended. Now, looking at the reliability on testnet, what was brought to our attention is a standby guild, namely one in a zillion. Where are they? Missing 3 rounds. So we were looking at the cause of those missed rounds and found out that it was not this guild's fault, because this guild received rounds or blocks late and therefore forked out and therefore missed also the rounds. And we can see that when we look at the node EOS monitoring by EOS Nation, that on the WAX testnet, the guild that was in schedule prior to 1 in a zillion indeed sent the blocks out late. Where is it now? And that caused them to miss the rounds. So that's where we decided it was not the guild's fault and credited the full score for round availability. So this is what I'm talking about. We got unfortunately one guild sending out blocks late, and this is affecting the next guild in schedule. So whenever you see an issue with rounds or blocks missed, and you can see inside your logs that you received blocks late or something, please let us know, at least in the appeal, but you can also include it in your report and we will take care of that. We don't have any rule in place yet that deducts points from your guild when you're sending out blocks late, but we are considering spinning up a rule around that so that we can avoid this issue in the future. But this is yet to be discussed, and I'm not sure if it will make it into 5.2. And I see we got some hands raised from Michael. So I'm inviting you to stage to talk.
Awesome. I got a question about the opinions, and it's an ongoing conversation on the CPU metrics.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you can now get hardware that's so fast, even without running overclock, you're smoking it. But that's 3 times faster than 0.3 or whatever, right? So I mean, just like you don't want them to be slow, you don't want it to be too fast. We can try to pull them back, and try to slow things down. And the reason I bring it up, not so much that they're causing problems, more I'm about to buy another machine or two, but a 13th Gen i9's gonna post numbers like that. And then I started thinking, how do I even slow it down, or just using older hardware? But do we look at shifting it forward or do we look at pulling them back? What's y'all's opinion?
Yeah, first of all, help me please understand what could be the implication of running a producer twice as fast as everyone else does.
So just an example, I mean, the CPU metrics, it just does a simple mathematic calculation and says, how long did it take you to do it? Well, it takes Taco's server 0.1 milliseconds to process it, and they'll get billed 0.1 milliseconds for that process. Well, I don't know, I'll pick mine. I think I'm like a 2.2 or something like that. That's roughly twice. So to do the same mathematical calculation, it takes my i9 twice as long. Therefore, I'm going to bill the end user twice as much. So the block producers are just with a 0.1 and a 0.2 I mean, that's an exaggeration, but you get the reason why you like to try to keep them in a band. And the problem is that VPs tend to always want to go fast, right? I mean, we can throw hardware at it, we can go faster, but you really need the rest of the network to be able to get the same type of hardware to even keep up, right? I mean, if you've got your exchanges requiring running 13th gen i9s, they're going to start not supporting your tokens and stuff. Anyway, so does that help explain why you think faster is better, but it's that range of all the BPs that'll, even the APIs are going to be estimating things that are dramatically different than what Taco's doing, just using them as an example. In a good way, they won't get billed as much versus the other way, they get billed too much and they exceed their maximums, but it still can cause that discrepancies. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
I think one interesting question to look at is why they are so much faster than everybody else. Because as far as I know, most of the gears right now are running the 12th Gen i9s, same as Taco. So maybe we can pull the entire chain a bit up, but we should not get too fast, as Michael says.
Would it make a difference if my my API is much slower than my ultra fast producer?
It makes a difference in the path of your processing of transactions, but really everybody's APIs is throwing it into the, speculative, and then Taco's scraping what's there to be processed and just doing it. So it's all APIs that are ultimately potentially out of sync. Does that make sense? I don't want to pick on Taco. I'm sure they've got a blazing ass brand new machine. That doesn't surprise me that they can start to get down to 1.11.
The APIs are the potential bottlenecks here, right?
I mean, APIs
if we keep
supporting
upgrading
infrastructure.
producers and making faster and faster, but the APIs do not keep up, then I think
APIs / supporting infrastructure, the ship nodes that are, or the trace API nodes that are feeding or whatever, right? I mean, the BPs, all of us on this call typically, we can just go faster. But what happens is you got to really keep in mind, we already require 128 gig machine, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, it's yes, but it's more global than just your API and your BP, because the BP is just scraping everything that's percolated through.
I see.
So
Pavel also raised hands.
We shouldn't encourage to get faster and faster producers unless the whole infrastructure keeps up with that. I mean, that made sense like 2 years or 3 years ago, but right now, that's, at least is what I'm getting from this conversation.
Well, Moore's law is kicking in. I mean, every 2 years, it's twice as fast, and that's about what we've seen, since this step down. But the overclock issue is a little different because I think it does things differently than like all the other nodes are.
Yeah.
So it's not just that overclock is doing it faster and why it's so hand slapping. It's more, it does it a little different, and if everybody else doesn't do it that exact same way, it could potentially cause a ripple effect as well. So it's not quite the same. It's just normally that's the indicative when people would be like, there's no way you can get a 10th gen i9 to go that fast. You're right. A 13th gen i9 probably, or whatever the Ryzen or Threadrippers or whatever are, but they're not quite the same. They just look the same because this is a kind of, somewhat litmus test of giving you some benchmarks, but not definitive. I would vote that they probably just got a brand new badass 12th gen, 13th gen, maybe. We're running a 10th gen. So just to give you a bearing, I mean, I think we're, I don't know, I guess probably towards the top of that now, but ours is still a 10th gen. And like I say, I'm debating, do I throw the 13th gen at it, or, 2.2 is already decent.
So reading from the chat, Implutnal asked, if a producer is faster and put more TX into a block, then that means everyone on slower hardware takes longer to process that block. Is that right? And Aaron answers correct. So Implutnal shares his concern that people will start targeting that producer for their transactions since it's cheaper to execute, right?
May I add? I just want to expand on this question, and I would like to clarify this for myself as well. So, well, as we know, the throughput of the system is defined by the slowest node within the system. So, is this really a concern for us that one of the producers is running faster than anyone else? Well, is this really a concern for us if we still have to deal with network throughput? So, in case if Taco's generating, signing blocks faster than previous block producer or next block producer, does it really matter if they still send the confirmation pending list, etc., with the same speed as anyone else? And I'm not sure if this is even a concern. And next, well, I would say it's a question from me. Can we really maybe try to align ourselves with using OC? As far as I remember, we dealt with OC problem starting from 3x node OS version. Isn't that right? We can use it in production right now. As far as I remember, there were comments from developers or I don't know, someone involved in Nodo's upgrades, etc., etc. I mean, code upgrades.
So nobody should be running OC for stability reasons on the producer. That's right.
There's also still security concerns as far as I know.
So it's still security concern. Okay. So with
now
regard,
you can, that what they say is that if it's like a read-only node, that would be a candidate for
I'm aware
OC.
of that. So I know that only block producer nodes are restricted from using OC in general.
Don't do it on your APIs either.
I know. I was just wondering, maybe it's okay since Nodo's version 3x and more. So if that's not the case and we cannot use it, then my question still stands. Is that a problem that some of us produce faster, taking into account that we still have network throughput? So can anyone answer that?
I'd answer it, but I mean, it's the OIG's floor, so I don't want to take their stuff.
Yeah, so I'm good. Thank you.
That's a good question, and whoever can answer it shall speak now.
Anybody else? All
Michael.
Right. So the same concept, like you're right, first off, to say it's not nearly as big of an issue as a potato node, somebody running, say, 0.5 or something like that, because they're far outside of the norm. Although, just so you know, there's plenty of machines out there that are running those types of specs that people live and die off of. So we don't want to leave them too far behind. That somewhat plays into, if you say that a slow potato is harmful because you're overbilling and potentially getting a dramatically different result, it's the same problem when you have a producer that's twice as fast as the other 20 or 2 or 3 of them or whatever, is that it now makes the majority of the network be the overbillers and providing that different experience and the APIs and all of that. So it's not going to overbill the user like a slow potato does. It's going to dramatically underbill and cause some blocks, like you talk about, it has a capacity of 200 milliseconds. They can squeeze twice as many transactions into their blocks than any other nodes that can validate in 200 milliseconds, because they can do it twice as fast. So the problem becomes, even if it's just 1 or 2 block producers, they can start producing these big, heavier blocks that push out the median block producers of 0.2, and then your supporting APIs and your normal Xeons and stuff like that are running 3s, 4s, and 0.3, 0.4.
So you mean this potentially may cause for example, too many transactions in pending for other producer which is next to Taco, for example. They
or overload the history solutions behind it, because I think, like I saw Aaron post in there, you know, I mean, like state history nodes are doing more work than the block producer. Well, they still got to be able to keep up, and does that make sense? I mean, that's why it's always kind of been this band that you try to keep it in. We focused on cutting out the potatoes, but then what ends up happening is like, and it's natural, right? It's what we do. Give me the new biggest, baddest, fastest. Look at this, you know, super fast number I'm posting. But if you start looking at how that actually impacts the experience of the chain, and even just the stability of the chain beyond the super nerds that are running racks of I9s.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
So is there any like way to achieve this through configuration on the server, or is it really only hardware dependent?
I mean, you can. I've slowed things down in previous lives. I mean, that's you know,
it's pretty easy from the configuration from hardware configuration perspective. We just have to do the other way that we did for speeding up things. So they have to, I don't know, maybe enable hyperthreading or something like that.
Turn off the performance mode and stuff like that. I mean, that's what's kind of, and we call it dragging your feet in different things. Yeah. But anyway, it's a weird conundrum to have to be, but it's every couple of years had to come up that we get a pretty big range in the differences. And I only bring that up because like I said, I've got to buy another server, and I was just looking at these graphs on the other screen for that reason, to see where we're at.
I see. Anything?
So that's why oh, go ahead. It was just an open question to you guys and everybody else, right? I mean, I know my opinions. Y'all know my opinions.
So on a scale from 1 to 10, should we be, how much should we be concerned about this?
Concerned? 3, but not ignorance of kind of bad word to it. You don't want to, you know, be blind to it. Let's put it that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because like Taco is going to do, everybody else is going to do the same thing. They're going to throw the newest hardware at it. And do we recommend that they don't at this point? Or do we push everybody down and then we lean on the exchanges and say, look, we're a highly performant chain. I mean, that's, you know, we're a victim of our own success, but it will continue. You'll have more and more and more of them. And then you'll start to get half of the chain doing 13th gen i9s and the rest of us going, look, Graymass is going to scream that Robo can't keep up with the, you know, monstrosity of data that it's processing. Sorry.
Yeah, but over time we will likely have to move to 13th gen i9s because of the RAM limitations, because the new cores and the new CPUs, or is it even 14th gen? I don't know, I lost track of that. But the new ones can do, as far as I've been told, can do more than 128 gigs of RAM. So we will have to move on. And there's essentially 2 directions. Either we go server cores and slow the entire chain down, or we all go i9s and accelerate the whole chain, because it would be sad to let it go to waste.
And force all of the supporting infrastructure, your DApp, APIs, and your exchanges. So your two,
of course,
they get caught by that because they got to go to, they can't run a $100 machine now. They got to run a $400 machine. You know?
So, the only question is if this is, if this is economically justified. Do we really need that big of the throughput for the whole network? Do we really have to process that much of the transactions?
Right now, we don't.
In the future, yes, I agree.
Yeah. Down the line, we do. Right now, we don't. I think right now we don't even utilize what we have. I mean, we're still artificially limited by the settings we have in Yosio that's still based on what we launched with on EOS in 2018. So we still have the same settings. So there's a lot of overhead right now that could be utilized to increase our throughput that is not right now. So before we accelerate all the processing, we can look at that and test with that. And then down the line, as new hardware gets faster and cheaper, we can look at improving the entire chain. But right now, it shouldn't be a priority.
But as I understand, it's a positive side effect for the user that transactions are much cheaper the faster the producer time is.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's not concerning that it's not going to break much, but it's going to continue to, like you see those starting to drop. They're all getting newer machines.
Yeah. All right, that was a nice discussion about this. So we are closely monitoring what's happening here, but we got still a lot of stuff to find out and to discuss about, especially when it comes to producer APIs, producers, history nodes, the setup, how we can have the most vital variant of our network. So let's get into the next topic, because this might be also relevant for this. Not only the producers are flying and we are seeing a vital network, but we also see that the APIs are overall doing pretty fine in the network. So APIs are available when it comes to RPC, reading from tables or pushing transactions. We can see we got a wonderful uptime in the network with some minor exceptions. Is what we discussed right now, the speed of the server, any important for the API metric, like the availability of API nodes and how well they function?
I mean, I can say ours takes a pretty good beating, but it needs to be a similar processor to what the block producer are running to estimate the same. And of course, the recommendation, but it's purely off of an operator's aspect of whether subjective billing's enabled. But I don't. You could test it, but you'd have to do a lot of poking and prodding to test it.
I see. Okay. Then let's transition into the monthly requirement that we put out up front of the evaluation cutoff, because we were eager to learn more about the usage statistics of the APIs, namely the differences between the RPC API and a partial Hyperion or a full Hyperion in this case. So we are currently trying to find out how much demand we have on the history side and how much demand we have on the RPC side. I want to talk about the quality of the submissions for a second, because we received not so many data points. I will not share this because it's not yet ready to share, but we got some numbers from some guilds when it comes to those stats, and we can clearly see that we got a very wide range of API calls, ranging from standby guilds receiving only a few 100K requests per day, up to Eosphere totally ripping it with 28 million requests per day. So this is a breakdown on daily requests. I needed to do the calculation manually because most of you submitted 7 days or 30 days. But essentially what we want in the next report submission, and we will ask for it explicitly, is stats like this. This is a breakdown of 30 days. We got, in this case, a separate chain API server and a separate Hyperion API server. And a separate Hyperion API endpoint. So that's where we can see the difference in usage, which is totally nice. How it should look like is also how gray mass reported. I might have closed it down, but the thing we want to know is how many people use. What we exactly want to know is how many people use the chain API through Hyperion and how many use it standalone. And if the Hyperion has usage, how many of this usage is just passed through Node.eos, and how many of those requests are really history requests for Hyperion v2 in this case. So I will
see. I mean, our stats are going to be all over the place because, like, a lot of us that get hammered on our APIs, I hard code route around Hyperion because it couldn't keep up with passing through. It would kill my Hyperion. So, like, all of our Hyperions are purely Hyperion. None of them are pass through. The other interesting thing is, just so you know, if you have, I don't know, 10 million hits a day, 10, 15, I saw Aaron has 20, 28, something like that. We're having to build databases that for a 30-day retention is like 500 million API records, or I mean, even up to 1 billion records. So, I mean, I'm going to have to build an i9 server with terabytes of space to be able to index all, or just keep the log and report off of, and we have it. It's just we only kept it for a couple of days, and that's why so many people kind of went, holy shit, you want 30 days? So that may be something interesting, seeing some of those other numbers. I mean, we get 9-10 million, but 28 million, that's yeah, he's gonna have a hell of
So I think for a rough overview, submitting a report for a single day is within your log retention of a few days. For example, many people are using Cloudflare to funnel the traffic, and there you can see stats for the last 7 days only, for example. So their log retention is also pretty limited. So we should probably start with a single day of data. I think that's achievable for everyone. And if there's no objection right now, that's what we will be asking for.
I think, honestly, I think it would be good to have at least 7 days because the usage will vary drastically over the week. So I don't think having 1 day makes sense because somebody will take a snapshot of Sunday, one will do Wednesday, and this will not be even. So it should probably be at least a week to have a rough overview. I think likely it's still influenced by when in the month it was taken, the week, but it's better than having 1 day. 1 day is just not really comparable all in all.
I agree, and the 1 week retention is kind of middle ground for everyone, because for someone who can use who is using third-party solutions to actually track this data can provide 7 days for sure. I think it's kind of basic available logging and tracking for any third-party providers. So this kind of retention time is golden for us. But I wanted to ask with regards to, well, how should I say, centralized monitoring that we discussed some time ago. And is that probably our integration of Prometheus and our adoption of Prometheus in general might actually help us, because this monitoring tool allows us to actually centralize the stats gathering in one place, or we can track everyone by the web of scrapers. Everyone will be tracking everyone if we allow to use, I would say, Prometheus exposed metrics for at least API usage. And I think it's possible to integrate it into Hyperion in order to actually have this unbiased statistics for everyone, and everyone will be able to, I mean, from the WAX block producers and everyone involved into infrastructure, into public infrastructure support, will be able to verify the data directly and probably, well, I think without any issues. And I wanted to clarify, did anyone try to use built-in Prometheus and probably some other black box exporters for Hyperion and Atomic and other APIs that we expose? And what is the opinion of our community on this? Did anyone bring this into attention of everyone or not?
So just to clarify, Prometheus, the Prometheus exporter is able to export into any destination, so into a completely foreign Grafana, for example. So if we set up a Grafana, you guys can export your logs into that?
Well, I mean, it can be done. I don't know if it's quite as simple as.
Yeah, it's well, I would explain it, I think, in easier terms. The only thing that is necessary for a block producer was an API, for example. Simple example, only chain API. A block producer that exposes this public API exposes matrix, Prometheus matrix to, for example, some specific subnet that only block producers are aware of, and have the ACLs tuned to only allow access this matrix endpoint for block producers. So, for example, I am, as weekend block producer, can reach out to any matrix endpoint of any of our publicly exposed APIs. I can scrape that data, store it wherever, Elastic or what other storage anyone prefers, and I can actually expose that data for the block producers, and someone from other block producing guilds can also do the same, but by the same mechanism. So basically, we have this data exposed for us. Our only job to scrape the data from other APIs and store it and expose it. So anyone can do that. Anyone can verify it. We can, I don't know, compare the data that we store, etc., etc. So
I can speak a little bit that we've run into this with other scraping of data from the nodes, even just a simple get info, is that a lot of myself, I'm pretty sure Sphere, Sweden, I think Aaron, our APIs are front-end proxy servers that are fielding those requests amongst multiple nodes, even doing the same role, or carving it out. And if you're pushing transactions, if you're getting info, if you're get tables, stuff like that. And even behind there, we typically have 3 APIs, 2 that are actively servicing round robin, and a third that'll step in when one goes down. So when you ask a node for information, if it's the node that's responding, it only knows about itself and doesn't have a true understanding of the entire rest of the API, because I'm pretty sure Ross isn't running 28 million hits a day off of one single API. I did see somebody mention about the logging and the load it puts on it. We use HA proxy, so that's where everything comes through our front end, and then that's what gets routed amongst all the different servers, and obviously has its holistic statistics. And ultimately, we're using an ELK stack that's spitting that information out to an Elasticsearch database, which is very minimal load. It's not a lot to log all the information because HA proxy just does it. The problem is using a 500 million records to run a report to say how many, were doing this, were doing that. But Pavel, and on your side of things is that one example is like, get supported APIs. When you query an API, the node responds with it. It has no clue that there's Hyperion, that there's a Atomic, that there's any of these other services. It's the proxy server that ultimately is masking all of that. And see, like we use one API URL for all of our services. So it's not different servers for different, Atomic or Hyperion.
Yeah, I agree, Michael. My point that exactly we don't have to store logs. So Prometheus allows us to do this. So basically, it's less
Which Prometheus?
less heavier than actually storing logs and kind of trying to calculate everything by tags within the Elastic, because Prometheus metrics are designed for that specifically.
We're a heavy Prometheus Grafana shop. I'm very, very fluent. That's what runs all of our stuff.
Yeah.
My question is what's exposing and gathering those Prometheus stats? Because Prometheus is, just kind of exposing it in a standard format and sucking it into a database. If ours would have to come from HA proxy, not from the node itself.
Yeah.
Well, then we're basically going to have to manually build something to gather. Yeah, and Aaron is, Nginx and different things like that. So
that makes it harder. I agree. This is kind of the situation where it is possible and kind of I think the most proper way for us to actually validate and verify in centralized way the metrics that we want to gather from the guilds. But the difficulty is that we still have to build some standard for HE proxy, because, well, HE proxy, Nginx, Apache, maybe someone uses it for proxying. We still have to build some standardized format for actually building exporter for our proxies. Yeah, I get it, and this is kind of a separate task which someone has to deal with. Someone who can start it, or probably.
I think it's going to probably be on the burden of the block producers to build whatever infrastructure they need to integrate with their services. I know, like Boyd, I don't think they're on WAX, but they have their own proxy server that's kind of coming out. So I'm sure it's going to be another platform. But my kind of statement to it was, especially after seeing everybody else's ridiculous numbers, is that to generate more than a week crashes my Elk server. And so that's why it's got all the data. It's using the data is really some of the problems. So if we really want to do 30 days, I get it. It's a much bigger sample and it does vary from week to week. One day is way too small. It might be a 7-day and you just kind of have to extrapolate off of that because Cloudflare's got some limitations and just the sheer amount of data. I was mind blown. I mean, it's terabytes of HA proxy logs.
I actually, that's why when this question regarding statistics was brought up a couple of weeks ago, I was kind of boggled, because we use third-party solutions for monitoring and stats gathering, and it will be really expensive to actually upgrade some of those plans, and some of those plans is impossible to upgrade. For example, Cloudflare, there are 7-day statistics available, and in order to actually move from off of that, I have to complete, I don't know, the upgrade of everything and create some other additional load for our budget in order to keep that consistent. That's only the task, and it's tremendous amount of work which required. So I was kind of boggled, and I wanted to come up with some easy solution, but it turns out that it's not that easy to use Prometheus for that. And everyone, at least for now, everyone should come up with his own solution to track the data. We just need to be sincere about that.
So it sounds like we didn't yet bury the idea of external validation of APIs, since it matches more kind of the customer experience or the user experience. But this is very advanced if we oblige every node operator to run his own or to export those data and whatever it takes to. We got different setups. We got HA proxy, we got Nginx, and whatever else. So in conclusion, we did not bury yet the idea to have a good external validation. But at some point, or the other way, would it bring us closer to having like a central load balancer for stuff like Hyperion APIs or something?
Because I'll be honest, I mean, from two sides of that. One, the centralized load balancer's great, but it still becomes a central point. I mean, it's very difficult to keep 21 to 30 different providers in the mix and valid, and then every other response that they're getting back is coming from different providers. Telos is doing it and having good success at it. The majority of them use it. But every now and then you see people kind of going off on tangents. Ours has been one. I was running an older Hyperion and it had a bug that every now and then when you talk to my server, you happen to, whatever. And it was very difficult because it's obscured, as well as, man, you unleash these bot farms and these smashers on any centralized. I mean,
yeah,
like I got to believe Aaron runs a pretty big proxy worldwide mesh. And he's, it's got to be pretty difficult. And I know he, has issues with nodes behind it, just kind of going out of sync. And you kind of got to go, all right, where are you? Who are you talking to? Let me find the rabbit hole to go down.
Right.
So that's definitely one piece of that.
That's a difficulty.
Yeah, and someone should be brave enough to actually support that whole web of interconnections. It's really hard task to implement.
The other thing I would say from working, being one of the providers that tries to find all of the API needers, right? There are some of us that are trying to provide services either complementary or if we can, charge for them. But the majority of people that end up kind of coming to us, what we're finding, it's not even so much that the APIs are down, it's that they're rate limited and ultimately halfway through the process kind of fall down. But as I tell them, well, even ours included, there's a threshold. You should see the millions of hits that these guys are, smashing it, is that Wax Wallet or Anchor, is chatty. And of course, some websites are chattier than others. I mean, not in a negative way, but there's a lot of back and forth and query, push, query, push that you can very quickly kind of ramp up into a throttle, as well as, and I had to do this on my own servers, subjective billing is that I'm surprised at how many people run into subjective billing issues and they're not a bot farm. I mean, they're just a normal DApp. I mean, maybe they're not working efficiently if they're hitting subjective billing quirks, but I've the things that I know we do to try to protect and throttle and make it usable are the very things that pretty quickly most of these dApps, after they start getting the a global user experience, really start noticing and needing some resolution.
So what you specifically are talking about is the chain API and account query feature, which gets very abused on those APIs because people just fetch it like unlimited times just to see
By
if
far,
something.
it's get tables. I mean, we do have like get authorizers and yeah, I mean things like that. We do have push transactions, but I mean it's get tables, push transactions, and I think authorizers was the third most. That it's all of them. It's all over the place. But what's the same about them? There's 11 million of them a day, you know, and there's 5 million push requests, 6 million, you know, get table rows. One interesting thing has been in ramping up the reporting is I start to see more. I can see all the games that are being botted because they're smashing my servers, querying the account tables or history of their accounts or get blocks or whatever. So, and then, you know, refer APIs. I found all sorts of bot sites.
Okay, then talking of that, what do you think about the features history v1 and which will be discontinued in the newest WAX Leap release, I think, and Hyperion v2, which gets like 99% of requests are get transaction or get actions, just to confirm if a transaction made it in.
It may not be fair to ask me. I'm a Hyperion. I've always been Hyperion, so Aaron and I have had this conversation many of times because gray mass, you know, there hasn't been V1 history in a while, but that's what a lot of people still use. Hyperion kind of supports it, but it's not the same. There's some extra information in V1 that's different. So it'd be unfair if I didn't, you know, I think state that Gray Mass, who is probably by far largest history provider, the reason everybody uses Gray Mass, one, they're good at what they do, but they're also that V1 is true V1, and there are things that people used and they couldn't get away. Yeah, you have to understand that Hyperion servicing V1 is pretending to do it. It's kind of converting it to a V2 request and doing its best to fulfill that request, but it's not the same, and people have picked up. Yeah, it's slower than.
Yeah, true. Robo. So whatever is in the Hyperion API v1 chain gets passed through to the Node.js and just cached by the web server inside Hyperion. And the implementation for v1 history in Hyperion, namely get transactions, is just like a mock of the traditional v1 history. But what it really does is it just looks up all transactions in the Redis and returns them. So,
but it's missing information, as I understand. There was some critical information early on that to keep the size down. I'm speaking out above my pay grade, but Aaron may be able to post a chat or something about it. But there's something that's missing from the V1 out of Hyperion, even on top of the fact that it's different, slower, not really V1, but you're absolutely right. V1 has been deprecated since day one. It just existed until they finally killed it off in the 3 or 4, whichever one it was, 4 maybe, and that finally pushed everybody off of the cliff. But
it should be feature complete or compatible to the old V1, because I'm not even sure if it's missing data, but it seems to be somewhat comprehensive to the old V1.
There's something, Aaron, do you know? I want to say like a sequence ID, a global sequence ID or something like that, or maybe I'm smoking crack. I don't know. But the other interesting thing about it is, oh, go ahead. I hear Aaron.
Hi there. It doesn't have all the data. It is missing a bunch of sequence numbers. The data patterns are switched around. Whatever it's returning out of Hyperion isn't a one-to-one match as to what the standard was when we had that plugin. So like if you call the same transaction against our API versus the same transaction against this mock API, like they will not be identical results.
I see. But yeah, but that's actually our problem sometimes. So
all the time.
All the time,
yeah. If you see your transactions on a block explorer in reverse order, there's a pretty good chance it rolled over from Graymasses v1 to a Hyperion v1 or v2, and for some reason like sorts them the wrong way. But
yeah,
after existing in this world for so many years, and again, I'm a Hyperion. Aaron and I've gone back and forth. I've tried to kill v1 for so long, and I've done a good job, 99% of transactions. But that's why I say it's unfair.
If you look at those reports, like our history API is serving out like 33% of the network's history traffic.
Correct.
Like we alone versus the other 30 block producers. We have a lot of that traffic. A lot of people still use v1, and that's because it's faster. Like it takes about half as much time to serve a result.
Is this due to your custom Roborovsky solution where the transaction cycle is properly implemented? You send the transaction to the chain natively; it doesn't return anything, but but Roborovsky returns you the action immediately, right? And the status of execution.
It's more about the actual HTTP response time of it, as opposed to how quickly the transaction appears in the database. I think they're equal on how quickly it'll actually show in the data set, but when you make that call to the API, like our APIs return in 10 milliseconds if you're close, whereas Hyperion is going to take 100 milliseconds if you're close.
And does your response return when you are sure that the transaction is being processed, or do you return like it is not executed yet, and I need to do another request to check if it's returned, if it's executed?
It does include speculative transactions, and it handles forking and rolling back and all of that other stuff. But people, I think we need to make a push for people to use the new Get Transaction Status API. And if that's not a metric on the OIG scoring, maybe that should be as well. Because with this new transaction status API, it can reduce the load on every history solution if we can get that publicly available and then apps starting to use it.
Right.
Because that API endpoint was built to serve as a kind of light history to verify the irreversibility of a transaction.
Yeah. And that's probably also the purpose of most of the calls to v1 or to v2 also. So I'm seeing that exact same thing on Hyperion. Hyperion just being queried if a transaction made it into chain or not.
Yep. That's a big part of it. I don't know if it's the majority of it. And the other big part of it is block explorers. When you go and you search for a transaction ID, or your wallet says a transaction's complete and gives you the ID, you can click on it and it goes to a block explorer. That's the other main use. And that's mostly, I mean, people do, I guess, use it to verify the finality of a transaction, but they also use it to look at what was performed.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's more of a power user thing, but that's why I do it.
Got it.
And he also mentioned another interesting topic from kind of a chain standardization. As I'm running through 150 nodes doing all these upgrades, I'm getting new endpoints and trying to standardize my configs and whatnot, and really trying to get a bearing even in my own network and understanding of everything. What are now the recommended settings for an API node? You just fire up the HTTP plugin. That's great. It'll serve get tables and get info and stuff like that. But the account queries, is true. The transaction reversibility database setting now. There were, and subjective billing. Of course, that's subjective to each operator, I guess. But and no. I'm not gonna say no network has it, but with 4.0, I really think I'm having to loop back around and what exactly should an API node as a public API provider, right? I mean, that's something we try to strive our purpose in life. What does my API actually need? and I don't know, nations that pinged me and said, hey, can you turn this on? Because it doesn't work. I'm like, oh shit, I didn't even know to turn that on. My bad, yo. So with 4.0 and a lot of the new endpoints and things like that, number one, encouraging all operators to do it. Yeah, maybe we can test it and probe it to see if they're there. But additionally, you got to get the people to use that. And some people will, and some people are just going to do whatever the hell they want. They don't care. They're just beating it into submission. But
true. Any recommendation from your side if when it comes to the following question: a chain API and account query node should be separated from a history node?
I would say yes. I think in my mind, I guess where I was first going is I think you might find there's a third one that's going to show up that carves out from the V1 chain, is that transaction status or whatever, right? Because it's not built into the standard HTTP plugin. Any of those, we need to encourage everybody to run them because, again, it's a new feature. It doesn't tell you that it's not there. You just don't run it until somebody queries it and it's not there. But then secondly, either everybody required to do it and you assume that it's there, or it has to be identified as a feature to say, yes, we've configured our APIs to do this additional endpoint, and then encourage all people to use only those APIs because those are only the ones that are going to do it.
Yeah, so from DX and UX, DX is developer experience, I'd expect, so how a typical RPC works is I push my data, I get a result. Except you're working with something like hooks or WebSockets or whatever, anything else. But that feature is currently not in our scope. So I push my transaction to a node, to a server, and I query a whole other server for the transaction status, right? That's, I think, not what a developer is expecting exactly.
I don't think you'll ever, I mean, not to say you won't ever get around that, but your API gives you an estimation and best effort, but there's always a potential fork or a different billing or whatever. Is that, I mean, in blockchain, that's how you get burned, is not going back and checking that it's right on chain. And why people just smash the history and say, because another thing you got to remember is that to do history, it's layer 2. And that has made a lot of people mad once they had to get off of a native V1 history. Now, there was the V1 trace API, which helped address, at least it was a native plugin. It didn't require a layer 2 solution, but that's why they're trying to replace these things at the API level, which is layer 1, and people can do that on their own without having to run Hyperion or whatever.
I think this will also be changing as more people start switching to Wharf. Wharf is going to have some of these things built in, like there's a transaction finality plugin. There's 2 of them actually, which you can just drop in, and then whenever you perform a transaction, it will use the best practices to monitor finality of that transaction and take action. So I agree. Right now, people are kind of writing their own hodgepodge solutions to how to handle that situation. But as we get people to move into these newer SDKs, and they can just drop in a plugin that always behaves the same way, it'll use that the thing that's on the screen right now, the transaction finality status. Those settings, it will go down and it will call those new API endpoints to verify the finality of the transaction, as opposed to the developer being like, oh, I'm going to use Hyperion, or oh, I'm going to use V1, or whatever they may choose. So if we can establish best practices through SDKs, I think we'll funnel people into the correct solution.
So we're talking about the plugin for the APIs, right? The WharfKit plugin. Okay.
I mean, the one I'm thinking of, and in that the transaction status reversibility, yeah. The max storage size, if you don't set that, I see it on the screen right in the middle. If you don't set transaction retry max storage size gigabytes to something, it doesn't enable that API.
Correct.
And so it's an optional API, just like account query, enable account queries or whatever, you know, that it's a rider on top. And if you don't know to turn it on, it's not going to respond with it. So if all of your APIs, we need to either require it and force everybody to always have it on, and then obviously remind them that it's there, or it's going to have to be updated in like the JSON standard, just say not everybody offers it, but if you do offer it, like account queries, you've got to broadcast that out, and then people have to know and go and pull their curated list.
So when I run it on my my chain API node,
your API will respond with this transaction API.
Exactly. So we should, I don't know how the implementation yet looks like, but we could probably oblige people to have it activated when running a chain API.
I would tend to lean towards making it a requirement. I don't even know, does the account queries even maybe fall into that? But it also goes back to providing the standard, what is required, what is expected. Just because, like I said, I didn't even think about it until I got asked why it wasn't on. Because I forgot to turn it on that node.
When did this feature get introduced into Leap? Because I missed it.
3?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, maybe
3.1 maybe.
3.1.
It was. Yeah, it was a proposal out of the API Plus blue paper that then, right when the ENF started contracting OCI to build features, this was one of the first features they built. So I think it was either 3.0 or 3.1 that this came out.
There you go. It snuck in there. Like I said, I didn't even, because it's optional. And like I say, if you don't know, you don't know. Now it's on all my nodes because I'm going through every single one. I'm having to modify all the config. So I just made sure to try to paste that in. But that's the reason why I brought it up to begin with, is I was like, oh shit, I don't even have my own new standard, right? My standard config INI has half a dozen things that aren't even valid options anymore. The other half is standard settings, and it's missing 2 or 3 things that, yeah. Anyway, that was the whole.
Interesting.
And there may be another one I'm not even realizing, you know, and Wharf sounds like they'll kind of help drive people to be expecting that.
Surely.
So that may be something down the road that we're thinking about testing and requiring. But I just wanted to bring that up because it burned me.
I think it makes sense because right now we are just seeing an uncontrolled amount of simple requests, and got our guilds moaning about their servers being abused. And I think it's due to this feature not being implemented network-wide and being used by the end user or the developer.
Well, and I'll say, I mean, we don't have the largest Hyperion history services or history, but our abuse isn't on our history nodes. I mean, they're using it for inefficient things. It's by far millions and millions more a day. Push transactions and get table rows. 5 to 10 million of each a day. Just constant smashing.
I don't know how many of you are actually in the Warp channel, but I ranted about this, I think, last week. One of the things that getting people to move over to Warp will do is that Warp natively, when doing table calls, will use JSON false in the query, which means that the servers don't have to deserialize the transaction, which reduces the load time by like half. So in theory, if we can get people to move over to that, that'll reduce the load on API servers by about half when it comes to get table rows, because then the serialization happens in the client as opposed to on your server for every request. So it's little changes like this that we're really trying to push forward on the SDK layer that will help API operators in the end, because their servers will be doing less.
That's actually pretty smart because most of the people just query for the execution time of a transaction or something and don't need the details of this action in particular. So that could save us a lot of bandwidth and requests potentially. Also load on the servers.
And it's also going to do that for ABI calls and potentially block calls. Like, we're really pushing for all of the API calls to be in their raw format. So that way the data your server is sending back, it's just reading from disk and sending it back. Whereas like 99% of the traffic all of us experience right now, our servers are taking the time to decode that raw data into JSON and then giving it to the client. So now the client's going to be able to do that themselves and save us a boatload of CPU.
I look forward to putting it's more costly on them now. Because, like, say, I mean, the thing in my head was if I do it twice as fast, they're just going to smash twice as hard. But hey, at least there's a negative connotation is it's going to take them twice as long to process it. Therefore, it'll slow them down. But I mean, I call them the R bots, but it's game bots as well. But they're just querying table data and then smashing in transactions, trying to manipulate it. And there's no cost to doing so until they get banned, and then they just bounce IPs and yeah.
True. Okay.
But anyway, I hear you talk about history, and I'm like, it ain't our history servers. Atomic gets hit pretty hard, but just knowing how we use Atomic, it's not uncommon to have to query, multiple pages, multiple rows, whatever. But it's the chain API and it's get table row and push transaction by far that we see. Now, obviously, GrayMass is different. Taco is probably different because I'm assuming they use their own nodes. Therefore, it's probably more what they do in their app versus Alcor are bots that beat the shit out of us.
Right. So I can say that up front, we are discussing a few changes on how we score APIs and stuff. It will take us some time, but we want to focus more on a very well working chain API on the network and being functional and serving the purpose that 95% of requests are for. So we might come back to this with an update in next or the roundtable after that. But thank you all for those very helpful insights today on the API thing. It feels like we got a lot of potential discussion here still to come.
Yeah, I could talk forever about it.
We know that. So we are 20 minutes over, but that's not bad at all. We can continue for another 10 minutes if you have anything you want to bring up or discuss. Now's the time. So I guess that's it. I'm stopping the recording right now.